Welcome to Oh My Menses, a digital space dedicated to all things menstruality, periods, hormones, and cycle-informed living. Join me, Karinda, naturopath and fertility educator, as we explore topics that we probably don't hear about enough. From stories of menarche, birth control, and common period problems to menstrual shame, sex, fertility, and the moon, if it's about the human female experience, I probably talk about it. This is a place of sharing, remembering, learning, and unlearning, where we come together and reclaim our cyclical power. So sit back, relax, let's all connect with our wombs, and remember our brilliant cyclical nature. Will I include this? I don't know. Okay, I'm really excited now. If you are listening to this, hello. You have found your way to my brand new podcast called Oh My Menses. And this has been an incredibly long time coming for me. I am experimenting with video recording this as well, but I'm new to the tech and I am learning, so this might not end up on YouTube, in which case I will cut this part out of the audio. Probably not. Otherwise, I intend to put this on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and ideally YouTube as well. Oh My Menses. That has been a name that came into my sphere of awareness, of consciousness, when I was 18 years old. And I'm gonna go into some of that origin story because that's what today is gonna be about. Just what brought me here. Not even really about who I am, although I guess indirectly you will be learning a lot about who I am. But really like my origin story into menstrual cycle awareness and caring about menstruality and women's health and fertility, because that's what this podcast is going to be about. And before I dive in any further, I want to start off with a cycle check-in, which is how I intend to start every podcast and also most conversations that I have with my other menstruating friends. And I want to extend that to you. I am currently on cycle day 5. And I'm feeling energized. I am feeling a little overwhelmed with the possibilities and everything that's in my consciousness right now and everything that I want to do. I'm feeling quite charged, quite zappy, and quite frankly, I'm glad that I am, because if I wasn't feeling this way, I don't think I would have finally bit the bullet and gone, Karinda, it's time to record the fucking first episode of your podcast. Please do it. So here we are. And what is my intention for this whole podcast? Oh My Menses. I want to normalize conversations about periods, about our womb wisdom, about our hormones, about our experiences as women and as people in female bodies, and all the nuance and the messiness and the humanness that comes with that. That is what I want to explore. That is what I want to talk about. That is what gives me joy to talk about. And quite frankly, this has been a long time coming. This is well overdue for me. Because it's really what I want to talk about most of the time. And I've had the idea to do a podcast like this for many, many a year. I think to begin with, it's going to be a lot of solo episodes of just me sharing my experiences, sharing my knowledge with you, sharing what I know and what I've learned, and sharing resources with you and inspiration. But as it grows, I really want it to become a collaborative, conversational podcast where I just have conversations with people in my life, my friends, my colleagues, my clients, even strangers, just having conversations about their menstrual experiences and their experiences of having a menstrual cycle. That's really, really what I care about. And I know that, we live in a culture now where, well, depending on where you are, hey, but in the culture that I currently live in, it's normal-ish to talk about periods and to be really open about that. And we see it in mainstream culture, in mainstream media, pop culture. Shows and movies will reference fertility and periods and menstrual cycles, to certain degrees. And it's so much normal to see, menstrual cups referenced in a TV show or something, just as an example. But I'm just reminded that we still have so much further to go. And for all the 1,000 tiny little voices that are in my head saying your voice isn't needed in this conversation, there doesn't need to be another conversation about periods or women's health or hormones, for every little voice that I have within me, around me, saying that, there's a much louder, resounding voice that comes from deep, deep within. That is like, you must talk about this. You must talk about this, and you must stop filtering yourself when it comes to talking about this. You must stop keeping your voice and your thoughts on this suppressed. And so here we are. So that is they are my seedling intentions for what I want this podcast to become. And you heard it here first. My intentions for this episode is really just about my origin story. What led me to giving this much of a shit about menstrual cycles and my journey. I've spoken about a few different aspects of what I want to share in different parts of the internet, but I don't really have it like all consolidated in one area, in one place. And so I think it will be kind of nice to go through that, just talking that out loud, even if no one listens to this, just the reflection and the healing and the cathartic nature, that the cathartic gift that it will offer me, I'm really excited about. I'm really just excited, more or less, to just talk out loud to myself. And if anyone wants to listen, I will greatly appreciate that. So where do we begin? I think I'll share my story of my first period, my first menstrual cycle, as a separate episode, because that is a whole thing in itself. So all I'll say on that front is that, all in all, I had a pretty good experience of menarche, my first bleed. When did it start? I have been interested in human bodies and taboo topics and tantalizing truths, if I'm going to alliterate that, probably since I was 9 or 10, probably earlier. But from what I can clearly recall, I was definitely in grade 3 or 4, 9 or 10. And I guess this involved just being really curious about nature in the human form, being really curious about nature in a sexual form, as well as the ecosystems around me. Always really curious about that. Always really curious about people and how they behaved, and anyway. And so I guess in school, when we started learning about human biology to some degree, I was really into it and I was really good at it, because I genuinely cared and I genuinely wanted all the answers. And then it really, my early day education, and I'm sure a lot of you will be able to relate to this, my early day education in terms of like primary school health and sex ed was minimal. I went to two different private Catholic schools, primary schools, and then went on to go to a Catholic but co-ed high school, secondary school. And the teachings were just poor. I don't even remember learning about sex ed or hormones in primary school. I think the school I started at were going to do it because my sister had that received that education because she was a couple of grades ahead of me. And then I moved schools before I got to like the age where they would teach it. And they just really didn't say much at the new school I was at. I do vaguely recall a very harsh conversation with a primary school teacher where she kind of just got all the boys to leave the class. And I think this was sparked by one girl in the class getting her period for the first time. And I think she was the first person in our cohort to get her period. So the teacher made all the boys leave the class and she was like, look, periods exist. If you need to change your pad, you get up, you go to the toilet. You don't need to say anything. We will have an understanding. You just get up and you go. And I remember liking that at the time. I remember appreciating that at the time. But now in hindsight, I'm like, we deserved so much better. We deserved so much better. Things were much better in high school. We had more teachers. I mean, it was a huge school, relatively big school. And we had many teachers who were like more willing to talk about that stuff, especially as we ventured into like year 8, year 9, so like 14, 15 years old. And I just became even more fascinated with it. Every period I got, I was fascinated by it. I wanted to talk about periods with my friends. I wanted to talk about periods with my mum, with my sister. I was really curious and aware of people menstruating around me. I also really took it upon myself to engage in a little bit of a trope, I guess, where I really wanted to be the one who always had a pad and like different kinds of pads and liners in my school bag. And for a little bit, I feel like I became the person that was like, oh yeah, Karinda always has pads. Like if anyone needed an emergency last minute, surprise period kind of support, I was the go-to. And I take a lot of egoic pride in that, let the record show. And then in year 8, so I would have been 13, 14, just 13, yet to turn 14. And at that point I had my period for just under a year, not even a whole year. And acne and my skin health was something that I really struggled with. Not in like the cystic acne, not the quite severe deep acne, but just really persistent chronic like pimples. And at the time I had really poor general health. I was a fussy eater. I have a very complicated history with eating. And so looking back now as a naturopath, I'm not surprised at all that it showed up on my skin. But it really did impact my self-esteem. I was fairly confident. Growing up, but it started to take a toll, and it was a point that people made fun of me for. And especially in year 8, that was just a rough year. That was I was bully victim central, if there was a location to describe that. Something just really shifted in year 8 where I grew less confident and I guess just more aware of my body and how I was in the world. So that led me going to a doctor, going to my general practitioner, who I've known since I was a young gal, or getting my mum to, make the appointment, begging her, to explore some options for my acne. And I tried the oral antibiotics, the topical antibacterial creams, probably some steroid creams at a point as well. And it didn't really do anything. And again, looking back, I'm like, yeah, because it wasn't a topical issue, it comes out on our skin, but it starts from within. And I'm not surprised at all that my skin issues got worse once I started menstruating because of the hormonal, so many hormonal factors at that point, especially as your body is in its first year of like adjusting to a menstrual cycle and getting into that kind of rhythm. So eventually, when the first line options didn't work, and I knew this, I was offered the pill at the ripe old age of 13, just coming into 14. And I knew that was an option, and I must have been on the internet at that time. That would have been 2009. But for some reason, I knew about the pill. I think my mum actually would tell me about it. Because she had been on it for many years and she remembered her skin being clear on it. Not that she ever really had acne or any like pimple problems. And I knew it was birth control to a degree. Like I knew people took that to not fall pregnant. Obviously, I did not know exactly how it worked. I was also under the strong belief that it made your periods better and that it regulated your periods. And there was a sort of coming together in my mind of like my passions where I'm like, oh my God, I love talking about periods. I love talking about hormones and I love the human body. And I to a degree, I was really interested and have always been interested in medicine. And so I was just like, oh my God, I'm going to like take this medicine that's going to help my skin and it's going to like support my periods. Like it's going to make my periods really regular. I don't think they were irregular, but I was just excited. I also remember being really excited that there was potential that it would give me a more feminine, although that's not a great term to use, a more curvaceous figure, to put it bluntly. No, not to put it bluntly. That's putting it very, very politely. To put it bluntly, I wanted my boobs to grow. And because all I thought was that the pill was just your natural estrogen that you already have and you're just having a bit more of it than your body can make on its own, I just thought, oh, well, estrogen stimulates breast tissue and like that's, puberty and that's how it works. And I was really excited for that. So I was so excited and it felt almost manipulative. Like I just knew the other treatment options for my acne wouldn't work and I just wanted to be on the pill. At 14, I just desperately wanted to be on the pill. So I was, over the moon when the doctor prescribed it to me. The instruction I got was that I wait for my next period, and when my next period finishes, I start the first day of the active pills. And then I was told that, the white pills are just sugar pills. You can take them or you cannot take them, but it just, take a break from the active pills because that's when your period wants to come. Yeah, wasn't explained to me the best. Was, huge. It feels criminal about, regarding the lack of education that women receive when they seek hormonal birth control options from trained professionals. It's disgraceful. And even though I was only 14, I was a pretty smart kid. My doctor could have had the conversation with me. But it wasn't really even about my age because, my mum didn't, at that point, my mum didn't even know about how the pill actually worked. Ridiculous. Very sad. I've spent a lot of time grieving that part of my life and wishing that I had just stuck with my natural cycle for a bit longer. Anyway, I got on the pill, super excited. Was so thrilled that my periods were like clockwork and so regular and oh my God, and lighter and less painful. Although I think I still do remember experiencing period pain in the years that I was on the pill. And thankfully, and also of course, just because of what I know now, my skin cleared up. So I was much more confident and it's kind of a really weird like social dynamic because it was at the age, like I had acne and pimples and blackheads from like early primary school years, like from when I was 9. So my skin cleared up at the same age that everyone else was like starting to get acne. And so I remember getting a lot of, lighthearted jokes from friends about like, oh, you wouldn't know what it's like. You don't know what it's like to have bad skin, when they started to get acne. And I was like, bitch, I've been there. Also, have you thought of the pill? I recommended the pill to everyone. I had friends with really severe period pain, to the point where they had to take time off school. And I was just like, pill. I had friends who had acne and pimples that were like mine in the early days. And I was like, pill, fixed me. And my periods are like this. And so I also adapted the mindset, or I guess lacked the mindset that medicine is unique and individualized, and putting the same medicine into a different human body is not necessarily going to produce the same outcome in every body. Like that is not how bodies work. We have biochemical individuality. We have different genetics, so many factors that determine how a substance is going to act in our body. So I was a little bit misinformed there as well. So yeah, I spent about from late 13 to probably around 16 on the pill. And I've shared a little bit about this on Instagram. I should probably do another post on it soon, actually, where being on the pill and having sex for the first time was so fascinating. So firstly, as I kept getting, I think I had to go to the doctors every 6 months to get a new prescription for the pill and just confirm that I wanted to stay on it and that it was working and that I wasn't getting any side effects that I was aware of. And especially as I got older, the doctor would ask me, my mum would be in the room and the doctor would ask me, are you sexually active? And I would just say no. It was something that was constantly on my mind. I've recently reread some really old journal entries where I'm like 13 and I'm like, I'm ready for a sexual relationship. Like that was my mindset. That was my brain. As I mentioned earlier, anything taboo, I wanted to be in it. I wanted to talk about it and experience it. And I was just growing up way too fast for myself. Now, having an understanding of trauma and how it affects the brain, I'm less surprised and everything makes sense, which I like. So I would always just deny to the doctor that I was sexually active. Then it got to a point I think I was just shy of 15, and then I was sexually active and on the pill. But again, with the misinformation that I had with what the pill was doing in my body, I was still really nervous about falling pregnant. STDs, STIs, I wasn't concerned about. I don't know why. Well, I guess because we used condoms. But anyway, my mindset was that oh my God, if I didn't want to get pregnant, I had to try and avoid sex at around day 14 of the pill packet, which I thought was day 14 of my cycle. Because day 14 is when you ovulate and that's when you can have a baby, or it's easier to have a baby or something like that. That's what it was in my brain at the time. So I avoided sex, even with a condom, while on the combined oral contraceptive pill on day 14 of the pill packet, because I didn't know that the pill was blocking ovulation, or I was just being really, really cautious. So that was hilarious. And I still, never risked it in terms of being on the pill. And I took it diligently, but I never risked it in terms of, not using a condom while being on the pill. It was just in my head that it's like, yes, I'm on the pill. Many a boy was surprised by that when we would have conversations about safe sex and protected sex, whether they were just friends or whether we were, negotiating intimate relations. They were surprised that I was on hormonal birth control at such a young age, but I was still just like, no, condom is condom. So yeah, that was my experience being on the pill as a sexually active human who was so painfully misinformed. But I'm really relieved that this is the work that I dabble in, and helping people come off the pill and understand what the pill is doing to their bodies is something I do. It's something I'm very passionate about. there will definitely be more on that on this podcast in upcoming episodes. So let's flash forward a bit to coming off the pill. Why did I choose to come off the pill? Having a vague recollection now. So I think around 16, 17 is when naturopathy came onto my radar, and I was much more into natural medicines, natural remedies, and starting to have this feeling of, I need to look after my body. It's what I put in my body is very important. And again, with a complicated history with eating, I found that really challenging. And so because food was hard for me to focus on and sort of quote unquote get right, for the sake of my health, I focused on everything else. And so I did consider what medications can do to the body and side effects of things and taking synthetic hormones and this was the same time I was getting into like yoga and meditation. And so I think I had it in my brain that it was probably good for me to not be on the pill anymore, especially, so I'd broken up with boyfriends. I was single at this time. Wasn't planning on having sex with anyone. And so I thought, I think it's good for me to like have my natural cycle. So again, even without knowing exactly what the pill was doing in my body, I had this awareness that something wasn't quite right and it didn't feel right to be on it. And yeah, I do remember having really heavy periods on the pill. Like it wasn't just smooth sailing the whole time. So I didn't get a repeat of my script, or I think I had one left and I didn't fill it. And my period came back, I think within a couple of months, and I remember feeling grateful for that. Again, not knowing how bad it could be, not knowing exactly what was happening in my body and how detrimental it was, I still had this like innate sense of like gratitude that my period did come back relatively easily. And the first time when I came off the pill, even my skin was okay for a bit. But again, that may have coincided with me just making generally healthier choices in my life and looking after my body a little bit more. And then, so probably a year I was off the pill. And then it was the last year of high school. It was year 12. And I found myself in a new relationship or seeking a new relationship. And I remember talking about it with my friend, and I just had this feeling of like, I need to get back on the pill. I want something to regulate my period, and then so I can better plan like when I have sex, and like more like not even really for birth control, like subtly for birth control, more so for like period management and being able to manage and influence when I was going to bleed and if I wanted to bleed. I did get into phases of skipping the break on the pill packet. And I remember in a rush, I found my old script where I think I had one repeat left, and I was like, right, to the pharmacy, went to the pharmacist, and they were like, yep, cool. And then they were like, oh, this script is actually expired. And it had like just expired. So they're like, no worries, like just go back to your doctor, get a new script. And I was like, oh, okay. And it was like a moment of like devastation. But looking back, it's one of the best things that has like just by chance happened to me. Again, just knowing what I know, there is no way that I wanted to be back on that. And I'm so grateful because that kind of unlocked a whole new path for me going forward. So again, year 12, I remember starting to have more conversations about period tracking and the timing of sex with friends, and just exploring that as a topic within myself. And so the rhythm method came on my radar. Again, I was still at school, and I remember having like a really old, like just dodgy, compared to what we have now, just the crappiest period tracking app you could ever have, that essentially just calculated based on like the length of your past however many cycles, just estimated using an algorithm, using a specific calculation when I was ovulating. And so I would avoid having sex within like the week, that fertile week, which I now know is not accurate or indicative of like your actual fertile window and when you can actually fall pregnant. So I'm very lucky and grateful that nothing happened. Again, I was using condoms, so I wasn't that worried. And then it got to a point where, for specifically personal reasons, condoms were no longer an option. And again, still in year 12, still at school, sexual relationships were still the highest priority for me, apparently. And so I was like, okay, oh my God, condoms aren't an option. That may have coincided with when I tried to get back on the pill. In fact, it's probably more likely that that's what made me try to get back on it out of some desperation, because condoms just weren't working. And I think I was sort of just going through the options that we learn about in health class. Like, they probably mentioned like IUD, a diaphragm, even though I don't think I've ever met anyone who's used a diaphragm. Implanon, like the injections, and I sort of had vaguely heard people's experience on them, and nothing felt right. Nothing felt right. And I think it was from a YouTube video that, will I be able to find it? If I find it, I'll link it. Probably, I think just from like a very low level influencer at the time. Influencers were so different in those days. This is like 2013 at this point. Who was talking about natural contraception and fertility awareness methods. And she recommended two things. She recommended a device that is probably still exists, but is outdated compared to the femtech that exists now. She recommended a device called the Lady Comp, and she recommended reading a book called, let me check, Taking Charge of Your Fertility. I can't believe I forgot the name of that book. That book literally changed my life. So between using this device that claimed to be able to pinpoint your fertile window based on taking your temperature every morning, which I'm grateful I had that, and it made my journey into natural contraception and fertility awareness easier. But again, with what I know now, I would never have like solely relied on that, and I didn't. So that's good. So I was using this device, which essentially gave me a red, yellow, or green light in the morning based on my temperature patterns, based on the length of my menstrual cycles, so based on when I had my period. It just gave me, it was just a traffic light system of like when it was safe to have unprotected sex and when it wasn't. So red days were like no unprotected sex, or red days essentially meant can fall pregnant. Green days were you could fall pregnant. No. Green days were can't fall pregnant. You're in the clear. You've ovulated. Go for gold. And at the same time, I was taking myself through taking charge of your fertility. Let me show you. It is a chunk of a book, and I'm just so glad that I found it. So I was taking myself through this, and this was teaching me all about cycle charting, all about identifying the fertile window, using a system called the symptothermal method of fertility awareness. And it was just an absolute revelation. I was just like, how did I not know about this? How did the women in my life not know about this? It was like the new pill for me. Just as when I was on the pill, I was like, everyone, you need to be on the pill. It's the best thing ever. When I discovered this, I was like, everyone needs to read this book. But, and this is a very great commentary on society, is it easier to take a pill every day that essentially tells you when your period's going to come, your period, quote unquote, versus reading a book this thick and educating yourself on how your body works? Like, what's easier? What will most people go for? And that was sort of my first initiation into realizing like, oh, people prefer convenience. I was in this situation where I had high motivation to be in a sexual relationship with someone, and what I had done in the past was no longer an option. And so I had to seek an alternative. But most people who are just cruising along, or who those options work for them, they didn't see a need to seek an alternative. They were happy with the convenience and the quick, pharmaceutical method that they had. And this is hilarious. So I was like, okay, yep, cool. Going to start practicing this method. This is going to be my system of birth control. Just shy of 18. I wasn't even 18. And again, to put this into context, like for my Australian friends, I'm studying for like VC exams. I had terrible mental health that year. Terrible mental health. And so I'm like doing SACs. Remember SACs? Ugh, dumb assessments and assignments, and studying for exams and being a high achiever, while in the background learning this whole method of understanding my body and diligent cycle charting in order to avoid falling pregnant naturally. Just blows my mind, and I'm so proud of my past self, and so glad that I just decided to say yes to that path. Also, it's testament, I'm a relatively lazy person. Although, laziness, there's nuance to that, trauma, etc., neurodivergence, etc. And I could do this. I could do this at a really stressful time in my life. So I just want people to know that, it is possible. And so the funny thing at this time in my life was I decided it was going to be my method of birth control. My parents were aware that I was in a relationship, and I was really happy to talk about this book and share the amazing findings in it that, I took pride in being really scientific and appreciating science and reading research and getting things right and accurate about how the body works. So I was just like, everyone, look at this science. And my mum was just beside herself. She was just beside herself that I wasn't using, proper protection, that I wasn't on a hormonal method. And it was interesting because I remember having a lot of challenging conversations with her where, she had been on the pill in the past, but for since her early 20s, she was on this path of natural health and being really aware of the foods that she ate and being aware of what she puts in her body and really dedicating her life to her health. So she really valued natural health and natural medicine. And yet introducing this concept to her that is based on well-known physiology of how ovulation works, how a menstrual cycle works, scared the shit out of her because it was new for her. And at that time she was in her 40s. And this was brand new information that you ovulate once in a menstrual cycle, you have a fertile window, and you can identify that fertile window by taking your basal body temperature every morning and monitoring your cervical mucus. So she was terrified. She was really angry at me for not being on birth control. My partner's mum at the time, I had many a good conversation with her. I was telling her about it. She was concerned. And it was this 17-year-old girl telling women in their 40s who had children, hey, no, I got this. I'm learning about my body. And essentially and I was a bit of a know-it-all. I'm a bit of a know-it-all. I was just I know more than you. I have this knowledge. I'm gonna do it. I know it works. It works for thousands, if not hundreds and thousands, if not millions of other people, probably millions at this point. I'm going to do it. I'm smart and I'm capable. I'm going to do it. And I think that intimidated some of the adults around me. So in addition to using that device, which in hindsight, I never really needed, I was also, based on the book, charting my cervical mucus and cervical fluid And it was so exciting. Like the first time I could identify ovulation, it was like, oh man, it was so exciting. It was like, oh my God, my temperature did rise. Oh my God, paying attention to my cervical fluid. Oh my God, it did sort of follow this pattern, and it did become, more slippery and watery and shiny, and then it drops off, and it's like, oh my God, like how did I not realize this was happening in my body beforehand? Like just absolutely crazy. And so ever since, that's been my method of birth control. It's not the best, we'll have many conversations about fertility awareness on this podcast, but just as a quick aside now, it's not the best method for one-off relationships. It's not the best method for what am I trying to say? For one-night stands, for non-long-term or non-monogamous relationships. There's a lot of factors to talk about there, but it worked for me. I was a serial monogamist from the ripe old age of 12, and so it's worked for me, and I'm really grateful for that. So even though I was practicing a fertility awareness method, I was pinpointing ovulation every cycle, I still wasn't really connecting to the phases of my menstrual cycle. At that point, based on what I had read in the book, I would have known that, there was a follicular phase and there was a luteal phase. Even probably from a very basic health class in high school, I would have known that. But it wasn't in my field to connect with the energy of the phases or to observe how I was feeling in each phase. I knew, again, I took so much pride in knowing that hormones exist, and I'm trying to understand estrogen, as much as my teenage brain could comprehend. And so to a degree, I knew that hormones influence my mood, affect the brain, can influence a lot of things, but I wasn't aware of the hormonal pattern. This became much more solidified when I went to uni and was completing my bachelor degree in health science and naturopathy, because I got to know a bit more of the hormones. And now even then, in my 4-year bachelor's degree in health science, where we learned extensively about the body, menstrual cycles and menstrual cycle awareness were barely covered. Spoke a lot about estrogen, spoke a lot about like environmental estrogens, learned a little bit about how hormones are metabolized in the body, how they're produced, the different forms they can become, how they're excreted, but not solidly about, hey, here's the menstrual cycle, here's the hormonal patterns. But because I had a much more in-depth understanding of biology at that point, and physiology and all the things, I was able to seek out the information for myself, did a lot of like continuing like professional education while I was at uni. That sort of kickstarted my journey into like really delving into women's health and female health and hormones and menstrual cycles. And there was a book actually, that really sort of kicked this into gear for me. It's called The Female Brain by Luann. I forget her last name, but I will link it in the notes or in the description. And that was just a deep dive into like the specifics of how your hormones, your female hormones and testosterone and other hormones and cortisol and things like that impact the different parts of your brain and the different brain cells that you have to influence behavior, to influence mood, to influence your neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, GABA. And my mind was just blown. I was just so relieved and excited to have found that information. Something else that was happening at this time. So this is like, I have a timeline. Flash forward a little bit. I'm probably now in 2017, 2018, 2 to 3 years into my degree. Maybe 3 to 4. 3 to 4 years into my degree, and this is when I was, really getting into the specific, endocrine systems in females and hormones and all that. And something I was going through in my personal health journey in my life at the time was really intense PMS. Now, in the background, there's period pain, there's polycystic ovarian syndrome. Again, we got a lot of time for a lot of different conversations, and I can't wait to go there with you, but I'll try to narrow it down. I'll try to hone it in for now. So I was experiencing a really intense PMS journey, and this information that I was learning at the time was so deeply validating. Oh, I cannot tell you how validating it was to not just be like, oh, PMS, my hormones are crazy. To have this like newfound understanding of like exactly what was happening within my body and what my hormones were doing, how they were interacting with my brain, and how that contributed to my anxiety, to my depression, to my mood swings, my irritability, my anger. So deeply validating. And just, shout out to people experiencing PMS. I was never diagnosed with PMDD, but I will say, and without trying to invalidate anyone else's experience or anyone else's diagnosis, there were some episodes where I was like, if I went to a psychologist or a psychiatrist at the time, probably relatively easily could have gotten diagnosed with PMDD, so premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or borderline personality disorder. But I don't think there would have been the nuance of understanding the cyclical nature of that. I think I would have just been given a diagnosis of a mental health issue, rather than a hormone-related issue. Anyway, that's not the path for me. I'm not interested in labels or diagnoses for myself personally. So I didn't take that path. But I just wanted to outline that to give you a little bit of an idea of like the severity. We're talking like out of body outbursts. And I did experience this as well a little bit on the pill. I had what I would call my first mental breakdown when I was on the pill. Just, again, like as I've learned more and heard more about other people's experiences, what I experienced feels really akin to an episode that someone would experience with BPD. Just feeling crazy, feeling so out of your body, feeling so overwhelmed by emotions and sensations, and that deeply impacted. So that was, had probably had a couple of experiences like that when I was on the pill, and then more of that just when I was naturally cycling, only in my premenstrual phase. So this brought into my awareness the whole premenstrual experience and how intense that can be and what's happening with your hormones at the time. And shout out to anyone that is going through that right now. PMS, PMDD, diagnosis, no diagnosis. My heart goes out to you. I know how intense it can be, and I would love you to feel assured in the fact that there are ways that you can smooth over the edges of that phase. And there will be a day where your premenstrual phase is not as intense. I've been there. I've been out of it. I get it, and I send you love. So having that physical and physiological understanding of what was happening in my body and my brain during the premenstrual phase really allowed for better communication with my partner at the time, understanding why we fought at certain times in my cycle, understanding why I felt certain ways or got more insecure at different times in my cycle, like super fascinating stuff, especially in hindsight. When I was in it, I was like, fuck this shit. Like, this is hard. This is intense. I hate this. I hate my body. Why do I have to experience this? And no doubt my partner was pretty frustrated at times as well, but did his best to be understanding. So yeah, having those discussions really did help, and just having that acknowledgement of cycle, just, yeah, game changer, total game changer. So sorry, again, if you're experiencing that and you have a partner or you have roommates or you have people in your inner circle who you feel are affected by any kind of premenstrual symptoms that you experience, especially when it affects your mood and your behavior, highly recommend just opening that dialogue and having that cycle aware chat with them. So cool. I was aware of when I was ovulating because of the fertility awareness method, and I relied on that for birth control. And I was aware of my premenstrual time because I became hyper-focused on that time because it was just such a point of contention in my relationship and in my personal life and inner landscape. And I still hadn't really tapped into the different energies of like the whole cycle and the different archetypes that we find within the cycle and the 4 different phases. You know, if we were to break it up into menstrual phase, follicular phase, ovulatory phase, and luteal phase, I still hadn't fully tapped into like each of those energies as like distinct energies. And I certainly wasn't like tapping into my body and sussing out what was going on as I traversed the phases. It wasn't until 2020 when I feel like a lot of the world was forced into a reset of sorts, a pause, a time for reflection, a collective phase of stillness and restriction and self-discovery. I hope a lot of people experience that element of it. And I was single at the time. I was living with my mum and my stepdad on their acreage, isolated, lots of time in nature, lots of time to myself, lots of time to really get an idea of who I was. And so thankful for just the things that I stumbled upon or things that were recommended to me, because I was led to the work of Jane Hardwicke Collins, and she really opened up my eyes to not fertility awareness, but menstrual cycle awareness. And I'll do an episode on the difference between the two. And this got me tapped into the energetic and the emotional elements of my cycle, and just offered like a whole new permission slip of feeling different things at different times, having different strengths at different times in my cycle. And again, like this information was like subtly in my sphere, but not in a real like spiritual sense, not in like a deep, knowing, unwavering, in my being, in my bones kind of sense. It was all the information that I had up until this point was very intellectual, very anatomical, very physiological. And I think this energetic and this spiritual and this unseen, non-tangible side of the menstrual cycle is what I was really, really craving. And it opened up my world in a wild way. I guess I just really tapped into like the ancestral energy of the womb, the primal energy of the womb, like the deep, like finally, after all this relating I had done with my womb, finally like accepting that she's a source of like deep wisdom, deep intuition, deep remembering, that she is, and that my cycle in itself is my connection to nature, is my nature, makes up my nature, makes me a part of nature. Oh man, so grateful. So I read and listened to the very short audiobook called Herstory by Jane Hardwicke Collins. You can access that through her website. I think the PDF is free and the audiobook is very low cost. And man, There was also a PDF she had at the time called The Spiritual Practice of Menstruation. She now has a book that is like a much more in-depth exploration of that called Blood Rights. Highly recommend that as well. Sorry if my audio cut out. I was just looking at my shelf instead of focusing on talking into the microphone. We're getting there. It's new. And what else? I think this also coincided with me finally reading The Women Who Run with Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. I might be mixing up the last part of her name. I'll link it in the description. And that was, oh man, that was just a combo. If you haven't done that combo and you feel like you're ready for more answers or a deeper awakening, oh, bless. Women Who Run with Wolves, Her Story by Jane Hardwick Collins, any other readings about menstrual cycle awareness, you are good to go. It will feel harsh at times. It will feel like a very intense initiation. Please follow through. It's incredible. And it was really great. It was really liberating. At this time, I was living with a male roommate who was a friend, and he didn't know a lot about menstrual cycles. And so as I was learning things and with the knowledge I already had, I was sharing a lot with him. And so we're having there was just good open communication about that, where we had conversations about menstrual cycles and menstrual cycle awareness. I could use that foundational dialogue that we had had to sort of explain if I was feeling off or if I didn't want to participate in something because of where I was at in my cycle, or, when I was experiencing my bleed, when I was in my menstrual phase. It was just a quick explanation. That was all that was needed. He understands what I was like in my menstrual phase, what I needed out of that time. And it was just, it was good to go. It was just a great, just again, having those conversations. Can't recommend that highly, highly enough. Have conversations about menstrual cycles with the people around you. Show them this podcast. So yeah, that was just really liberating to finally have this really deep understanding within myself and to be able to share that with people. And again, not from this just intellectual, just scientific sense. It was now from this esoteric, this very energetic, very spiritual sense. And that combination for me just I think gave me the harmony and the balance that I was looking for. I'm a Libran. What of it? I love harmony and balance. And yeah, now that is just a part of my baseline communication. My dog is barking. Talking about where I'm at in my menstrual cycle is something that I do nearly every day on the internet. It's something that I do nearly every day with my partner, or at least every week with my partner. It's something that I do with my friends and my colleagues. Just hey, where are you at? Oh, yep, I'm here. Here's how I'm feeling. Great. Normalizing cycle check-ins. This, reflecting on this huge journey that I've had, and now seeing that it's just a part of my everyday, and seeing it become a part of other people's everyday and their baseline understanding of themselves. Warms my fucking heart. Warms my fucking heart that I get to live this life. Yeah, I just feel really grateful that this is what I get to talk about and have as part of my tool bag as a naturopath, helping women every day, having an online audience to talk to about this, seeing other people talking about this as well and living their lives from a cycle-informed place. Oh man, makes me so happy. Oh, so good. So good. If you're here, if you're listening, thank you for being here. This is really good, and I'm really, really glad to have you here. Now, if you are new to menstrual cycle awareness, hang on, is there anything else I wanted to say about where I'm at? Probably not. I'll trust that there's not. I'll trust that I say everything that needs to be said and nothing that doesn't need to be said. So if you're new to the world of menstrual cycle awareness, I do have a little mini course that you can access that just sort of goes through the basics. As I continue with this podcast, there will be a lot more covering of the different phases and different experiences, and, having conversation with other people about their experiences of their own menstrual cycles. And I even hope to talk to some family members and, like my mum and stuff, and just talking about, our lineage as menstruating females in our family. But yeah, if you're new to that, I do have some resources on my website, courses, resources, PDF summary outline of the menstrual cycle and like the different energies in each phase and just the basics that you need to know, making it nice and crisp, crystal clear for you. You can access that at karindaholistics.com.au, KARINDAWHOLISTIX. I'm gonna have to get used to saying that, .com.au. So yeah, I've got my Menstrual Cycle Awareness Who Is She mini course that is $22. If you'd like to receive it for free, you can use the coupon code Oh My Menses at the checkout. That's on Thinkific, all available through my website. And yeah, you'll just see that I have a lot of resources there. I'm going to be doing more blogs as well, but mostly you can find me on Instagram, where I'm talking about this kind of stuff nearly every day. I'm not going to set a timeline for the podcast in terms of the frequency of episodes. I'm not there yet. It's probably a lot of businessy people listening to this being like, that's bad. Maybe not. Maybe you're giving me the benefit of the doubt. But I'm just going to go with my flow at the moment. I'm going to record as I get the hits of inspiration to record and to talk, and just trust that that's what needs to be out there at the moment, and that's what people want to hear and listen to and or need to hear. If you've made it this far with me, thank you so much. It was so lovely to have you here, and you know a little bit about me now, or a lot about me, which honestly feels nice. I like talking about myself and my experiences, and I'm just going to own that. And I can't wait to hear more about your experiences, because I also really love listening. And I can't wait to have more of these conversations with you and sharing these stories and talking about the things that I think we're still getting used to talking about. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Oh My Menses. If you have a special request of something you'd like to hear me talk about, or you have any questions that you want to ask me, please drop me a line at hello@karindaholistics.com.au. I would like to acknowledge the land and country on which I live, work and create, that of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I honour their connection to land, sea, flora and fauna across this country. I pay my respects to the elders of these communities, past, present and forthcoming.